Imagine a world where duty is a fortress and desire is a weapon. Lady Emilia Ashworth was raised for one purpose: to marry well, secure her family's future, and honor a promise made years ago. Her life was meticulously planned, leading straight to the arms of the wealthy, suitable, and utterly unromantic Lord Henry Blackwell. But fate, it seems, has a wicked sense of timing: one stolen dance, an impossible choice, a betrayal that could ruin them both. Welcome to She Was Promised to Another, But We Danced That Night, a sweeping tale of forbidden love, impossible choices, and the devastating power of a single fateful rhythm. Ready to fall in love with the scandal? Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single agonizing moment of their journey. Chapter 1: The Waltz That Changed Everything. The air in the Ashworth Town residence ballroom was thick with the scent of lilies and beeswax, a glittering tapestry of silks, jewels, and restrained London society. Tonight was the last grand ball before the official announcement of the engagement, though everyone in attendance already knew the outcome. Lady Emilia Ashworth, a woman of 20 whose grace was matched only by her quiet obedience, stood near the periphery, a living testament to her family's successful social maneuvering. She wore a gown of pale, cool blue, a color that perfectly matched her dutiful, somewhat distant composure. Her betrothed, Lord Henry Blackwell, was across the room, deep in conversation with a minister of state. Henry was handsome in a severe, functional way. He was wealthy, well-positioned, and treated their impending marriage less as a union of hearts and more as a strategic merger of assets and titles. Emilia felt a profound sense of inevitability when she looked at him, a resigned acceptance that had been the cornerstone of her life since she was old enough to understand the word duty. It was Henry's fault she was presently standing alone. He had been due to claim her for the approaching waltz, but had been detained, merely nodding his excuse across the room without a hint of apology. Then, a presence materialized beside her, radiating a warmth that instantly contrasted with Henry's cool detachment. Captain Julian Harrow, Henry's closest friend and a man whose reputation for charismatic wit preceded him, offered a low, elegant bow. Julian was 27, a man whose tailored black coat couldn't quite contain the inherent restlessness in his stance. Unlike Henry, who was fixed and static, Julian seemed perpetually on the verge of movement. "My Lady Ashworth?" Julian's voice was a low-pitched baritone, cutting easily through the orchestral murmur. "Henry seems entirely devoted to the dissolution of the King's Parliament tonight. Would you perhaps consent to saving me from the same fate, grant me the honor of this waltz?" Emilia managed a small, polite smile, the kind she had practiced 1,000 times. "Captain Harrow, it would be my pleasure. I confess I was beginning to feel rather ornamental." "You are anything but ornamental. Lady Emilia," he murmured, offering his arm. His touch, though formal, sent a peculiar tremor through her. It was the first honest statement she had heard all evening, perhaps all month. As they moved toward the center of the polished floor, the orchestra swelled, beginning the stately, dizzying rhythm of a Viennese waltz. This was not the first time they had danced. As Henry's friend, Julian was often a fixture at Ashworth functions. But tonight, something was fundamentally different. The moment Julian's hands settled upon the small of her back and his other gripped her hand, the polite distance that normally governed their interactions evaporated. His palm was warm, a stark, immediate counterpoint to the silk of her glove. As he led her into the first spin, a flash of shared realization passed between them, a recognition that was almost startling in its clarity. He was an exceptional dancer, strong, confident, his lead subtle but absolute. But it wasn't the mechanics of the dance that mattered. They were moving in perfect, intuitive synchronicity. Emilia, who had always danced with a controlled formality, suddenly found herself leaning into the movement, letting his strength dictate her lightness. Every rotation, every turn seemed to be less about following steps and more about a rapid, wordless conversation. Her gaze, typically lowered or fixed politely over a partner's shoulder, was drawn to his. Julian's eyes, a piercing shade of gray, were fixed entirely on hers, and in their depths she saw not the familiar, charming friend of Henry, but a man grappling with a sudden, overwhelming force. There was a raw, almost desperate intensity in his expression that mirrored the unfamiliar racing of her own heart. He pulled her closer for a difficult turn, their bodies momentarily near touching. The sudden proximity, the heat radiating from him, was a shock. She was acutely aware of the impossibility of this moment. She was dancing with her fiancé's closest friend, and with every graceful dip and turn, they were crossing a line that society had deemed unbreakable. The music reached its crescendo, the notes swirling around them like a vortex. Julian leaned down, his lips brushing the delicate curve of her ear, his breath warm against her skin. The polite formality was gone, replaced by something immediate, urgent, and profoundly dangerous. "One dance, and I am undone," he whispered, his voice so low that only she could possibly hear it, a confession torn from him in that brief, dizzying moment. The words were like an electric current, delivering the final, shattering blow to the careful facade of her duty. He had articulated the very thing that had exploded into being between them, a connection so instantaneous, so electric, it felt like an act of fate. The final, soaring notes of the waltz faded into silence. Julian held her hand for a breath too long, his gaze locked with hers, a shared, silent acknowledgement of the seismic shift that had just occurred in their lives. The air crackled with the unspoken implications. They were both shaken, suddenly strangers to the people they had been 5 minutes prior. He released her, a flicker of profound regret darkening his features. Henry, finally free from his political entanglement, was now approaching, a slightly annoyed expression on his face. "Julian, thank you for stepping in," Henry said, his tone one of casual dismissal. "Emilia, the Duke wishes to speak to you about the spring cotillion. Come." Emilia felt disoriented, as if she had just stepped off a spinning ship onto solid ground. She moved from the heat and intensity of Julian's immediate sphere into the cool, expected grasp of Henry's arm. Julian only offered a curt, formal nod to Henry, but his eyes returned to Emilia's for one last lingering moment. It was a silent vow, a terrifying promise. They had parted, but the exquisite forbidden truth of that single waltz, the secret that now resided between them, had irrevocably and forever changed the course of their lives. Chapter 2. The Weight of Duty. The days following the ball were a blur of congratulatory visits, fittings for wedding gowns, and the relentless, suffocating rhythm of preparations for a society marriage. Emilia's world, once merely controlled, now felt like a gilded cage slowly tightening around her. Her mother, Lady Catherine Ashworth, was in her element. Practical, demanding, and utterly convinced of her daughter's excellent fortune, she constantly enumerated the advantages of the match. "The Blackwell estates are vast, Emilia, and Henry is a man of position and sense," Lady Catherine declared one morning over tea, her voice crisp as starched linen. "You will have security, a place of profound respect. This is precisely what a woman of your standing is meant to do. Duty over self, always." Emilia simply nodded, accepting the familiar mantra like a heavy shawl draped across her shoulders. She should have been focused on Henry's advantageous status, on the magnificent diamond awaiting her, but her thoughts were a constant, treacherous loop back to the ballroom. She was haunted by the memory of Julian's touch, the momentary heat of his palm through the thin fabric of her gown, the raw sincerity in his eyes. The single whispered phrase, "One dance and I am undone," felt more real than the solid, imposing walls of her own home. The polite meetings with Henry, however, offered no relief. He treated her with formal, almost paternal courtesy, discussing schedules and settlements with more animation than he ever discussed her feelings. He was precisely the man her parents wanted for her, predictable, reliable, and utterly emotionally detached. He saw their marriage as a contract, and Emilia realized with a sinking dread that she was expected to be a flawless, decorative signatory. Meanwhile, Julian Harrow was engaging in a vigorous, if futile, campaign of avoidance. He found the familiar corridors of London society suddenly treacherous. He was torn violently between his deep-seated loyalty to Henry, a friendship forged years ago in shared studies and youthful recklessness, and the overwhelming, fierce pull he felt toward Emilia. He attempted to immerse himself in his military duties and the demands of his club, but every card game and every discussion of foreign policy was interrupted by a vivid recall of Emilia's astonished gaze during the waltz. The thought of her marrying Henry, his friend, a man he respected but knew to be incapable of seeing her heart, was a physical agony. He began refusing invitations to Ashworth functions, And when he couldn't refuse, he positioned himself strategically at the far end of the room, like engaging in boisterous conversations to keep his eyes from straying. He was fighting a losing battle against his own growing obsession. The small, tightly knit world of the Tun quickly ensured that avoidance was impossible. 3 days after the ball, they found themselves at a crowded literary reading in a wealthy dowager's drawing room. The setup was intimate, the chairs arranged in tight rows. Fate, or perhaps a mischievous servant, placed Julian 2 rows behind Emilia. She wore a simple dress of deep green velvet, and the light from the candelabra caught the dark sheen of her hair. Julian didn't hear a word of the poet's recitation. He only saw the slender, dutiful line of Emilia's neck, the tension in her shoulders. Then she shifted slightly, turning her head to offer a comment to Henry, who was seated beside her. In that fractional movement, her gaze swept across the room and met Julian's. It was only a second, a bare flicker of contact, but it was enough. In her eyes, he saw the same torment, the same terrifying recognition he felt. It was a communication that bypassed words, a silent acknowledgement of their shared secret, a painful reminder of the betrayal inherent in their very presence in that room. The glance lingered, stretching into an eternity, until Julian, feeling the sweat break on his palms and the sudden, intense scrutiny of the surrounding company, was forced to tear his eyes away. Every subsequent encounter, across the lawn at Hyde Park, during a crowded receiving line, or even just passing carriages on the street, was the same. Their eyes would meet and the world would narrow to the space between them. Every shared glance was a betrayal of Henry's trust, of her family's duty, and of their own self-imposed restraint. The tension was a taut, visible wire connecting them, drawing the attention of observers. London society thrived on such undercurrents, and though the engagement seemed solid, the astute members of the Tun were beginning to notice the unusual gravity between Lady Emilia Ashworth and Captain Julian Harrow. The gossip had yet to catch fire, but the kindling was dry, and the smallest spark of longing could set it ablaze. Emilia returned home that night after the reading, feeling the weight of her diamond betrothal ring heavier than ever, the metal burning like a brand. She was meant for safety, for duty, for Henry, but her heart, foolish and disobedient, was beating the rhythm of that one stolen waltz, demanding a passion she was sworn to deny. Chapter 3. Forbidden Longing. The initial, subtle noticing had curdled into something far more substantial. Society, that exacting judge and relentless gossip-monger, was now undeniably stirring. The whispers started small, tucked behind feathered fans and silver tea services. Did you notice Captain Harrow's perpetual proximity to Lady Emilia? Such longing in his gaze when she is near Lord Henry. Gossip began to stir like sediment in a fine wine glass, clouding the clarity of Emilia's advantageous match. Lady Catherine, sharp-eyed and socially astute, noticed the pointed looks and the sudden silences when Julian's name was mentioned in Emilia's presence. The pressure tightened, and Emilia knew their carefully guarded secret was rapidly approaching exposure. The strain of maintaining this elaborate deception was exhausting. Henry, thankfully, remained oblivious, preoccupied with his political ambitions and the logistics of securing the final settlement. His continued lack of emotional interest in Emilia, however, only amplified her guilt and her desperate, suppressed feelings for Julian. The opportunity for a necessary private confrontation presented itself during a large, lavish garden party hosted by a duke in Richmond. The gardens were extensive, designed with secluded paths and hidden grottos, the perfect setting for either a clandestine romance or a desperate, painful farewell. Emilia, seeking a moment of air away from the cloying perfume and watchful eyes, slipped away to a small, vine-covered summer house. She hadn't been there 5 minutes when she heard the crunch of gravel and knew, without turning, exactly who had followed her. "I was hoping to find you alone," Julian said, his voice low and ragged, as if he had run a long distance to reach her. She turned to face him, the green light filtering through the vines dappling his face. His usual charismatic polish was absent, replaced by a weary intensity. "You shouldn't be here, Julian," she whispered, twisting the emerald ring Henry had given her. "We cannot continue this. The Tun is watching." "Let them watch," he burst out, instantly regretting the volume. He stepped closer, his hands clenched. "Do you think I don't know that?" Do you think I haven't tried to put an ocean between us? I've considered posting myself to the colonies just to escape this torment, Emilia. His confession stung her with its mirrored desperation. Their stolen conversation in the gardens had begun. Torment is precisely the word, Emilia admitted, her voice trembling. It is torture to stand beside Henry and remember the feeling of your hand on my back. But we have no choice. My family, my duty, it all binds me. I must be bound to Henry. Julian took another step, closing the remaining distance. The air between them hummed with unspoken words and unfulfilled promises. And what of your heart, Emilia? He challenged, his gaze burning into hers. I saw it that night. I felt it beat against mine during the waltz. Don't deny that it was real. It was real, she conceded, tears pricking her eyes, and it must be sacrificed. Julian, you are Henry's friend. I am promised to him. We share a debt of loyalty that is greater than this passing madness. Julian ran a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. A passing madness? It has consumed every waking hour since that dance. But you are right. You are absolutely right. I am a gentleman, and you are a lady promised. I swore I would not ruin you. He turned to leave, the fight leaving his body in a heavy sigh. But as he took the first step away, a silent desperation seized Emilia. This could not be the end, not with the unspoken confession still hanging in the air. Julian, wait, she cried out, the plea tearing from her chest. He paused, turning back slowly. She moved towards him, not thinking of society, not thinking of Henry, only driven by the sudden, overwhelming need to connect with the one person who truly saw her. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm, and the moment their skin touched, the last vestiges of their restraint shattered. He did not hesitate. His hands cupped her face, his thumbs gently brushing her cheekbones, and he lowered his head. Under the soft, watchful glow of the moonlight filtering through the leaves, they shared a fleeting, passionate kiss. It was not the chaste peck of an admirer, but a fierce, desperate joining, a taste of the forbidden life they could never have, a silent acknowledgement of the future they were denying themselves. The world dissolved into the warm pressure of his lips, the scent of his coat, the dizzying certainty that this was both salvation and utter ruin. The kiss was too short, an agonizing fraction of time. Julian pulled back, his eyes wide with a mixture of desire and profound horror. "Forgive me," he choked out, his voice thick with regret. I cannot do this to you. I will not be the cause of your scandal." He was gone before she could speak, melting into the shadows of the garden paths. Emilia stood alone, her lips tingling, her heart hammering a wild rhythm against her ribs. She was bound to Henry, yes, but that kiss, that forbidden act, had sealed a truth she could no longer deny. Duty had lost the battle to desire. Now the impossible choice was merely a matter of time. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. The secret kiss in the garden did not bring relief. It brought escalation. It was the spark that ignited the smoldering fire of their forbidden feelings, pushing all three central figures toward an inevitable clash. Lord Henry Blackwell had, until now, been largely oblivious to the intense drama unfolding around him. His worldview was too rigid, too focused on contracts and public perception, to conceive of such a disorderly thing as passionate attraction. Yet the subtle shifts in his fiancée could no longer be ignored. Emilia, ravaged by guilt and the overwhelming sense of having irrevocably sinned against her duty, had grown cold, not in malice, but in self-defense. She met Henry's attempts at formal courtship with a withdrawn silence, her usual polite warmth replaced by a brittle reserve. Henry, despite his detachment, was a man of pride, and her growing distance began to grate on him. He viewed her coldness as an affront to his status, not a symptom of her distress. "Emilia," he remarked one evening, his tone tight with impatience, "the wedding is a month away. I expect you to conduct yourself with the grace and composure befitting a future countess. Your recent behavior is unsettling." Henry was growing impatient with Emilia's coldness, demanding a public display of affection and enthusiasm she could no longer muster. He needed the world to see a perfectly happy, advantageous match, and her melancholy was beginning to tarnish the required facade. For Julian, the regret that followed the kiss had curdled into a devastating certainty. He had to leave. He saw the suffering he was causing Emilia, the risk of scandal he was forcing upon her, and the devastating betrayal of his closest friend. He believed the only honorable path left was pulling away entirely, severing the connection before it destroyed her life. He began making inquiries about a temporary extended commission abroad, contemplating leaving London to end the torment. The thought of putting the entire Atlantic Ocean between himself and Emilia was agonizing, but the thought of standing at the altar as Henry's best man, watching the woman he loved surrender to a loveless future, was unbearable. He avoided all society gatherings where he might encounter her, but the city was too small. He felt the weight of her distress in the silence of his rooms, the absence of her presence in his daily life, a heavy physical ache. Meanwhile, the pressure on Emilia became unbearable. The demands of Lady Catherine, Henry's increasing impatience, the stifling weight of the gown fittings, and the agonizing distance from Julian combined to break her fragile composure. She fell into a deep, anxious state, retreating to her room with headaches and a profound lack of energy. Emilia fell ill under the pressure, her physical ailment a direct manifestation of her internal war between duty and desire. Her only refuge was her younger sister, Charlotte, her practical and deeply empathetic confidant. Charlotte watched her sister's decline with growing alarm. "Emilia, you are wasting away for a man who treats you like an asset and pining for a man who is too noble to claim you," Charlotte said one afternoon, sitting by Emilia's bed. She placed a hand over Emilia's racing pulse. "Look at yourself. Is this what duty has delivered? Misery and illness?" Charlotte urged her to choose love over duty, demanding that Emilia consider the cost of a lifetime spent in quiet unhappiness. "Scandal is temporary, sister. Despair is forever. You must choose your own life before they choose your death." This raw truth, coupled with the unbearable proximity of the wedding day, finally drove Emilia to seek Julian out one last time. She sent a desperate note, asking for a meeting in a discreet, unused gallery at a late-night embassy reception. When Julian arrived, he found her standing amidst shadowed suits of armor, her face pale and etched with sleepless nights. "I heard you were ill," he said, his voice barely a breath. "I should not be here. I am making arrangements to leave." "I know," Emilia replied, clutching her hands tightly. "That's why I came, to say goodbye and to beg you to stop this madness. You must forget me. I must marry Henry." Julian stepped toward her, his restraint finally snapping. He grasped her shoulders, his gaze burning with a furious, painful love. "Don't you dare tell me to forget you," he hissed, his voice trembling with years of suppressed emotion. "Every breath I take reminds me of you. I see you every time I close my eyes, dancing with me, smiling the only genuine smile I have ever seen from you. Do you know what it costs me to stand beside Henry and listen to him talk about owning you? About your utility to his lineage?" He pulled her against his chest for a terrifying, agonizing moment. In a raw confrontation, Julian's shield crumbled. "I cannot bear it, Emilia." "Now," he admitted, the words torn from him like a physical wound. "I cannot bear to see you marry another. I will ruin my life, I will ruin my friendship, but I swear I cannot stand there and watch Henry claim the best part of me." He released her, the confession hanging between them, absolute and terrifying. The breaking point had arrived. They both knew that Julian's desperate love and Emilia's agonizing duty could not coexist for one more week. Something or someone had to break. Chapter 5. Betrayal Exposed. The raw honesty of Julian's admission left a wound wide open, a vulnerability in their armor that the predatory nature of London society was quick to exploit. The lingering glances, the hurried, desperate meetings, and the sheer tension that now radiated from both Emilia and Julian had not gone unnoticed. The betrayal was exposed not by a grand dramatic revelation, but by a slow accretion of petty jealousy and malicious whispers. Henry Blackwell began to notice the small things, a too quick shift in Julian's gaze when Emilia entered a room, the odd, strained silences between them, and most damningly, a discarded, crumpled note in Julian's rooms, a fragment of Emilia's distinctive handwriting asking for a final meeting. A friend, perhaps hoping to curry favor or simply enjoying the chaos, provided the final, fatal piece of the puzzle, a detailed account of the lingering, private conversation in the Duke's garden and the visible distress of both Captain Harrow and Lady Emilia in the weeks since. Henry was not a man of passion, but he was a man of immense pride. The realization that his friend and his betrothed were involved in a secret, emotional drama one that dared to prioritize feeling over contract, infuriated him beyond measure. This was not about lost love, it was about a stolen possession, a public slight, and a flagrant disregard for the social order he upheld. He confronted Julian late one evening in Julian's private study, the air thick with the smell of spilled brandy and rising anger. "I had thought better of you, Julian." Henry's voice was dangerously quiet, a cold prelude to a storm. He threw the crumpled note onto the desk. "My friend, my closest friend, to engage in such perfidy under my own roof." Julian, stripped of all pretense, did not deny it. He stood tall, accepting the full measure of Henry's wrath. "Henry, I do not deny my feelings, nor my actions, but you must know I never sought to ruin her." "Ruin her? You have already ruined my position. You have made a mockery of my judgment." Henry roared, his control finally fracturing. He was furious not at the love, but at the betrayal of their long-standing loyalty and the threat to his spotless reputation. "She is mine, Julian. She was promised. You had no right to sow this disloyalty." Henry's fury culminated in a violent clash. He accused Julian of being a snake, of being jealous of his good fortune. Julian, while acknowledging his guilt toward their friendship, refused to apologize for loving Emilia. "I love her, Henry," Julian stated simply, the truth a shield against the torrent of accusations. "She deserves more than a title and a schedule. She deserves a heart." Henry lunged, the physical confrontation short and brutal before Julian restrained him. Henry, gasping for breath, found his weapon: social destruction. The next morning, Henry summoned Emilia to the library. His face was pale, his eyes cold and hard as granite. He did not yell. His demeanor was far more terrifying, calmly, methodically, annihilating. "The nature of your clandestine meetings and your attachment to Captain Harrow has been relayed to me," Henry began, his voice flat. "Do not bother with lies. I have the evidence I require." Emilia stood trembling, the cold reality of exposure washing over her. "I am a pragmatic man, Emilia," Henry continued, pacing. "We have an opportunity to bury this. No one outside of a few key confidants knows the full truth. If we proceed as planned, you will be my countess. Your family will retain their standing. Julian will be exiled temporarily from London, and the whole affair will be written off as fanciful speculation." He stopped directly in front of her, his ultimatum chillingly clear. "You have a choice, Lady Emilia. Honor the engagement, marry me, and ensure your family's safety and your own security. Or you may face scandal and ruin." He spat the last word like a curse. "I will make sure your parents understand that every word of your downfall will be attributed to your own reckless indiscretion." Henry gave her 3 hours to decide, locking her in her suite afterward. The walls of the library seemed to press in on her, and the weight of the decision settled over her like a shroud. She looked at the elegant, familiar room, contemplating a life of security, duty, and quiet despair, the life Henry was offering. She thought of her mother, Lady Catherine, whose heart would break at the public disgrace. Then she thought of Julian, of the feel of his hands on her face, the sound of his whispered confession. Emilia was forced to choose between family, security, and her heart. The wedding eve was upon her, and the time for agonizing was over. Her final, devastating decision would be made tonight. Chapter 6, Destiny's Waltz. The night was the eve of the wedding. The Ashworth house was a hive of frantic, controlled activity. Flowers arriving, servants polishing silver, Lady Catherine giving last-minute instructions, her face alight with the triumph of a mother who had secured her daughter's future. Yet above the buzz of preparation, a profound silence reigned in Emilia's heart. She was dressed in a simple silk nightgown, watching the moon rise, the finality of Henry's ultimatum echoing in her mind: security and honor, or ruin and love. The choice had torn her to pieces, but now a strange, terrifying calm had settled. She realized that duty, while offering safety, demanded the death of her true self. Unable to bear the oppressive atmosphere of her rooms, Emilia slipped from her suite. She moved like a ghost through the silent corridors, the scent of the wedding lilies already cloying in the air. She walked down the grand staircase and past the antechambers, drawn inexorably toward the one place where her fate had truly been sealed, the empty ballroom. She pushed open the massive double doors. The room was dark, save for the weak silver light streaming through the long windows. The polished floor, usually a riot of color and movement, was vast and silent, waiting for the morning's festivities. This was where Henry had been forgotten, and where Julian had whispered his undoing. Emilia slipped into the empty ballroom and walked to the center of the floor, the exact spot where they had shared their single, fateful dance. She closed her eyes, trying to recall the exact pressure of his hand, the strong turn, the glorious, dizzying speed. She did not know how long she stood there, suspended in memory, but a sound broke the silence, the subtle click of the door closing behind her. She opened her eyes, and there he was. Julian found her there, standing framed in the moonlight, exactly as she had appeared in his tormented dreams. He had returned to the house, unable to sleep, unable to leave London without one final confirmation of her choice, drawn by a force as powerful and inevitable as the tide. Fate itself seemed to have orchestrated their final meeting, placing them together on the floor that had started it all. He said nothing, only walked slowly toward her. His face was a mask of despair, exhaustion, and fierce, unquenchable love. Emilia met him halfway. They stood in the center of the silent floor. No words were needed. The moment was beyond conversation, beyond protestation. Julian extended his hand, a simple, non-negotiable gesture. "One last time, Emilia," he murmured. She placed her hand in his. They began to dance once more. No orchestra played, only the silence and the pounding of their hearts. Their steps were slow, hesitant at first, then flowing into the familiar, perfect rhythm they had discovered weeks ago. They moved across the floor, their eyes locked, the movement a final, profound conversation. This waltz was not a celebration, but a declaration. It was the embodiment of their defiance, their passion, and their impossible love. As the dance concluded, they remained in the center of the room, breathing hard, their foreheads touching. "I cannot," Emilia whispered, the words clear and resolute, the answer to Henry's ultimatum. "I cannot live that lie. I cannot marry Henry, no matter the cost." Julian pulled her into a fierce embrace, burying his face in her hair. "Thank God," he whispered, a prayer of relief and terror. The morning brought the terrifying immediate aftermath. When Emilia failed to appear, the scandal was not a slow brewing gossip, but an immediate cataclysmic explosion. Lady Catherine was hysterical. Henry was incandescent with rage and wounded pride. The wedding was called off hours before the service. Henry, desperate to control the narrative, declared that Lady Emilia had suffered an emotional collapse due to pressure, but the servants whispered and the truth spread like wildfire. The bride had been caught with Captain Harrow on the eve of her marriage. Scandal erupted across London. The Ashworth name was instantly dragged through the mud. Ruin was precisely what Henry had promised. But as the noise reached a fever pitch, Julian appeared. He found Emilia pale but resolute, facing her furious parents and the prospect of utter social annihilation. He walked into the drawing room and stood beside her, placing his hand firmly over hers. He looked not at the gossips or at Henry, but directly at her parents. "Lady Catherine, Lord Ashworth," Julian said, his voice calm and strong amidst the chaos. Lady Emilia did not succumb to pressure. She chose honesty over a lifetime of unhappiness, and I fully accept the consequences. He met Henry's murderous gaze, offering no apology for his choice, only for the necessity of the fight. Then Julian turned to Emilia, raising her hand to his lips. He claimed her hand, publicly and irrevocably, vowing to shield her from ruin. "The consequence is this," he announced to the shocked room. "Lady Emilia will not face ruin alone. She is going to be my wife." The story closed on their marriage, a hasty, quiet affair that took place weeks later, far from the London scene. Their names were whispered about in every drawing room for the rest of the season, a cautionary tale of duty betrayed, yet a romantic myth of passion prevailing. Emilia had lost her security and her good name, but she had gained her soul. The consequences were real. The sacrifice was great. But standing with Julian, her hand held fast in his, she knew their stolen waltz had become their destiny. And so the story of the lady who dared to choose her heart concludes. Thank you so much for listening. Did their passion sweep you away? Did you cheer for their final silent waltz? Let me know your favorite agonizing moment in the comments below. If you love this angsty, sweeping romance, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more tales of forbidden love and impossible choices. Until the next story.